Hey guys, welcome back to Workshop Wednesday. I'm your host Garrett Shaw, and today we're going to be doing the next intermediate Adobe Illustrator tutorial. Today I'm going to be covering some of the more in-depth or more specialized parts of Illustrator and how to maybe make your objects a little bit more interesting. I'm going to be covering shading is basically what I'm getting at today. I'm going to go through simple, moderate, and advanced effects, everything from simple gradients to flat, more modern UI like Google's material design, a little bit of some retro vintagey design, which is kind of up and coming, polygonal design, things like that. So I'll also be giving you guys a worker file for this, so make sure to check the link in the description below and pick that up so you guys have everything you need to follow along. I'm going to go ahead and drop down the little window here, and you'll see I already have Illustrator open, so I'm going to switch over to the screen view here. So as you can see, I already have everything sort of labeled out, broken down, just to make it real easy for you guys, and so we can just not waste any time and kind of dive right through these and how to kind of create all these. The first thing that I did is I created this first box. I use this size for everything that I cover in the entire tutorial. Really easy, really straightforward. Just make a rectangle. You can make it a box, you can make it a letter, you can do whatever you prefer. It's entirely up to you guys how you want to execute that. But again, I'm using gray just to allow you guys to see sort of how it works on a grayscale before you add color. Color makes everything more interesting. So even at the most basic black and white, lame, boring version, you can see how some of this stuff can look more and more interesting as you go along. So first things first, I'm going to start with the simple stuff. We have just a gray box, and then we have our initial gray to white or black to white gradient. And then we have that vertical and horizontal. So all I'm doing there, I'm just going to duplicate this guy and click in there. So we have our vertical one and then our horizontal gradient. And that's it. That's all we're doing there is just, it's just changing the direction of the gradient. And that's giving us our different shading there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to change it from a linear gradient to a radial gradient. Basically what this gives you is sort of a spotlight effect, if you will, or a simulated spotlight. And essentially the way that this is going to function is wherever you click is the center of the light, and as you drag out it's going to transition to the dark. So think of the line that you're drawing as the radius of the circle that you're generating using the gradient, if that makes sense. So for instance, if I click out from the center to right here, that's where the black is going to appear, is at the end of my dragged location. So you can make some interesting things where it maybe looks like it's rounded coming out in the middle, or in the cases of these, make it look like it's highlighted from the top, right? Top, and then it has sort of a curved highlight instead of it being like a nice flat line. It makes it just a little bit more interesting, is basically all we're after here. And then you can of course do it from the side there and make it look like the light is over here to the side, and then you're dragging that out and maybe it looks a little bit bowed. You could maybe duplicate that and reflect a couple of them to look like there's a light in the middle sort of shining down on objects. I'm just trying to show you guys different examples of what you could do. I'm not giving you guys the best example of when you could use them, just that it is an example. That's it for the simple stuff. There's really not much you're gonna do without 2 or 3 clicks there. Everything is as simple as choosing the gradient tool or clicking and dragging. There's nothing advanced there, but what you will get out of that is something that's better than it just being a flat shape, if you're looking for a shaded object. If you're not worried about that, then by all means you can go ahead and keep it as a flat color if you want to keep a nice clean color scheme. It's up to you. Next thing, we're going to be looking at moderate techniques, and these are all a little bit more advanced, just to showcase what you can do with a couple of different things, different techniques, and some textures and stuff like that. First thing up, we're going to be using multiple flat colors here to sort of it's basically we're recreating a gradient here is the best way I can describe this. We're recreating a gradient using flat shapes. And the way we're doing that is we're just going to hit Control C, hit Control Shift V, and then we're going to drag this down to about there, and we'll pick that darker gray, and then we'll drag that up with Alt, and we'll create sort of this this other object here, this other box, if you will. And you could move that around however intense you want the shading to be. And then as we go up to the top and we progress up here, line that up and get a little bit lighter color. You could do this as sort of minutely as you'd like. So in the case of the highlight, like there's the same color. So if we go up one here, and then we Control Shift V that again, go maybe to a third of that, and then bump that up one more time, then do it again with Control Copy and then Control Shift V. And you could make those increments as much or as large or as small as you want them to be, and as sort of easy of a transition as you want them to be. It's up to you entirely. Now, with that being said, the next technique I wanted to discuss is adding shapes and sort of what that can do when you're creating a gradient. This is particularly showcased in things like these retro 80 texts you might see from Signal Noise. Signal Noise is a super cool guy, does a lot of really cool 80s retro style work, like obviously this is Kavinsky, the music artist. He's done some other stuff. He even has like some typefaces. This one right here, this brushstroke one, you can actually buy that. I think it's like $30. He's a super cool guy. So if you guys like his font, or you want to check out some of his work, by all means, go do that and tell him I sent you. Just trying to get my name out there. I definitely appreciate his work, and have sort of based my renderings of 80s graphics on some of the work that he's done. It just feels very on point the way that he treats things. I highly recommend his work for sure. So in this case, I'm going to be talking about using custom shapes here. So with a custom shape, all you're going to be doing is you're going to be using the pen tool and creating a base. Okay, so the way that I prefer to do it is to basically just line it up with the edges of the rectangle here, and you'll see there's nothing there by default. We're going to click and add a gradient in here. I need to grab the gradient window, and I need to turn that to linear, and then I'm just going to click and drag down. Now I want the black part up here at the top, and I want it to be pretty aggressive. I want that black to really sort of be there. Now, black is not necessarily the best way to showcase, or black and gray I should say, is not really the best way to showcase what this looks like visually. What I will do in this case, just to show you guys, is I'll go over here and kind of show you really quickly that if you add a gradient to this piece as well and go top down here, and we'll just we'll add some color really quickly. So we'll go with like this blue and this real dark blue here, and whoops, just to show you kind of the concept behind it. So we drag that down, and then from this one we have sort of the same thing there. As this gets lighter right there at the bottom of that, so we could duplicate this again, copy paste, and then it looks like he does sort of like a white line across there. So we'll just drag that down, maybe make it a little bit angular, and then turn the opacity. In this case, we'll just turn that down to like 30% or so. And then here in this gradient as well, we're gonna do this dark purpley color into the blue, into the white there, and yeah, so you end up with these interesting concepts for color usage, and you sort of then would maybe grab this box, expand it out a little bit. This is kind of the key thing, in my opinion, for making this look, I guess, I don't want to say realistic, but making the render look decent, is to do an inverse gradient there. It sort of helps sell the reflective property that. Now, it doesn't look good in this case because I haven't done anything to it. I haven't really added any detail, but you can see the similarities there in these cases. All right, so really all I'm trying to get at is that using custom shapes can net you some very, very interesting results if you just use them properly and kind of play with them to the best of your abilities. Adding in highlights, lowlights, shadows, multiple colors, things like that. We'll get into those later. But I just want to show you guys that, you know, you can use this to break up the monotony of a simple shape and a simple gradient. It makes it a little bit more interesting. Next up is something that I would normally reserve for Photoshop, but since we're doing Illustrator tutorials, I thought that I would definitely need to mention it, and that is bringing in a texture into Illustrator and then using it to texture an object. In this case, we're going to go online as soon as it wants to load up here, and we're just going to do a quick Google search. That's weird terminology for Google. So we're going to go to google.com. And we're going to just search in there. In this case, we're just going to search for texture as soon as it wants to load up. So we'll just do grain texture. My internet's running kind of slow right now. I think I'm downloading some files. I do believe Grand Theft Auto 5 is currently downloading because it's coming out on PC. Yeah, the inner nerd me is coming out. So we'll just do grain texture. Search. Come on, Googs. Okay, so we get all these different types of grain texture. It doesn't matter which one you choose from. Okay, it really doesn't. In this case, we're just gonna do it, you know, to kind of showcase what can be done with it. I'm gonna grab this one from grahamfisher.com. All right, so shout out to his website. This is not planned by any means. I'm just grabbing one willy-nilly here. I'm going to copy that image, and then I'm going to paste it in here. I'm then going to scale this down, so shift and drag. I'm going to scale it so that it sort of, I'm going to rotate it in this case. I'm going to line it up with my object there, and you'll notice that it covers up my whole object. So I'm going to hit Control Y to go to wireframe. I'm then going to click my shape here. I'm going to hit Control C, Control Shift V, hit Control Y again, and I'm going to click on these two objects, and I'm going to right click and hit Make Clipping Mask. I know that was a lot really, really fast, but it makes that object there. And then what I want to do with that clipping mask object is actually turn that into like an overlay or put it into multiply. In this case, I'll use overlay just so you guys can see that you can apply that to anything. Now, I can lock that object, and then what I can do is I can change the color to anything really, any grays. It's based on like 50% gray, I believe, when you're in overlay mode. But everything sort of affects the coloration a little bit differently, so you can get some different effects there. Real interesting, real ornate sort of textures if you want to go that route. Like I said, I prefer using Photoshop for this because it's a little bit easier to manipulate masks in that program, in my opinion. But that's up to you guys, however you want to do it. I just want to showcase that it is possible. I did the same thing for both of those, so I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Oops, deleted the wrong thing. Unlock that, delete the top layer, and then color pick that gray. Now, the next thing I want to do is I'm going to talk about halftones. Halftones are a very like old school way of shading things. You'll think of them maybe as like from newspaper comics or just newspapers in general when it comes to printing them. Basically what it is it's a dot grain effect that gives you a gradient, essentially. So wherever there's shading, it sort of does a if you've ever done a traditional drawing course, it would be called stippling. So the more dots, the darker the area, the less dots, the lighter the area, except it's done in an automated way. You're going to make a gradient, and then from that gradient, you're going to go to Effect. You're going to go to, I think it's Stylize. No, where is it? I got to remember. Pixelate. Okay, so Effect, Pixelate, and then you're just going to click on color halftone. And when you click on color halftone, it's going to give you this box. And the important thing to remember here is how big the area is that you're working with. In this case, 8 pixels is pretty small because I'm working at 1920 by 1080. So I'm going to go with the minimum or the maximum radius, right? So the largest circles that it can produce are going to be 8 pixels. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's just do 15 pixels. And the channels are based on your CMYK values, since I'm working in CMYK. If it was RBG, it would be 3 values, but doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And it's going to give me this halftone pattern. So again here, what that's doing is it's generating dots, larger to smaller, and increasing in frequency to as little frequency as possible. And what you can do from here, because as you can see, that's not really editable, okay? First things first, you could do what we just did and put that into a blending mode like multiply or overlay, okay? And then you could put that over top of an object. All right, that's an option, right? So multiply will work there over top of that gray. And maybe that's a result you were after, but in the event of you not being able to change the color, or you maybe want to be able to change the color, what you can do is you can go to Object, Expand Appearance, and then live trace the piece there, and expand it, and you end up with the dots, and you can kind of delete all the extra stuff around the outside there. Takes a little bit of cleanup, but you can kind of end up with a really, really quick color halftone that you can actually change the color of. So if you wanted it to be, if you wanted it to be white, I gotta change it out of multiply. So you can sort of have something to manipulate that with later on there. It's quick, it's dirty. Photoshop has an easier way of creating halftones, but for a vector halftone really, really quickly, if you need it, it's a pretty good way to do it. Just kind of, again, showing you guys what you can do. Not saying it's the best option, but, letting you guys know that it all exists. Last up, and these will be really brief because I already kind of covered them. Basically, the advanced versions are all going to be combinations of the different things. So, for instance, in this case right here, the first one is a combination of the flat colors, so multiple flat colors, and then a gradient over top of that. That's all I did there. And it gives you sort of everything gets a little bit of a shade accordingly, so it's sort of reinforcing what you're going for there. This one is just showcasing that you can add a gradient to the back and to the front of this guy right here, these custom shapes. So instead of them just being flat and mimicking these flat colors, you're actually utilizing gradients there. Again, sort of reminiscent of signal noises stuff. In this same case, we could do something with the texture where maybe we're not done with that and we want to add a gradient over top of that, and then we put it in a multiply, maybe bump that down to like 50% so it's not so aggressive. So you can end up with some really interesting results there. You could change the direction of that, and we'll go ahead and go up to 100. So as we increase the amount of black that's up there, we're actually hiding the texture underneath it. So that way the texture is looking like it's fading into the object here, and we could change that to any color we want in this case. So if we want to change that black to, again, maybe like a blue, right, and then change this to the blue, and then change the opacity to 0, you could transition from one color to another here with the texture being apparent. You can do all sorts of interesting things with overlaying objects and changing their blending mode. I haven't really talked to you guys about blending modes, as it's something that takes a lot of time and a lot of fiddling with to get good at. Just know that they are handled inside of the transparency window. Okay, so if you go to window and then transparency, that's where you're going to find everything for every object you have, whether it's opaque at 100% or 0, and then the blending modes that Illustrator allows you to have are also found here. It also talks about, like, how you can knock out your shapes and mask them and blend them together and knock out groups and things like that based on your objects and things like that. But I don't want to dive too far into those. Not today anyway. Just know that it's there, and they have different relationships. So the best thing I can tell you to do is click on them and then, go through them and see what each different one will do for you by just clicking through and checking them out. Okay, and I'll give you guys specifics on what they do later on in another tutorial. The last two, really simple. So this first one here is similar to a halftone. It's like a line halftone. Basically, all I'm doing here is creating a box like so, making it black, and then make another object, shrink this one all the way down till it's basically not visible, and then we're going to use our old friend the blend tool. So hit W or just click on the blend tool and click on one object, click on the other, and in that case, there we go. So it's kind of wonky sometimes because if you click on the wrong side and then click in the middle there, it'll try to translate it, and you'll end up with a weird result. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to double click on the blend tool. I'm going to go to specified steps, and I'm going to bump this down because I don't want it to be like so aggressive. I'd rather it be, let's see, about 12. Looked pretty decent. So we'll go with that. And then to be able to do anything with this, we can't really edit this as much as we'd like. I mean, we can make it skinnier. We can shrink it down a little bit, things like that. But maybe later on we want to be able to manipulate the color of all of them or, things like that. In this case, you could change the color of one object to another, right? So you could do, you can do all different sorts of things with colors in this program. But like I said, we're focusing on black and white here. So you just line that up with your object, and you get this, interesting sort of way of generating a shadow, if you will, dark to light. The last one, and but not least, is polygonal shading. It's mostly used to create like portraits or like simple graphics, sometimes logos, but basically think of it as polygons in a 3D object. It's hard to kind of describe in a simple manner, but basically if here's our light, so to speak, we'll make that, I guess black will make it easier for you guys to see, but think of it this way, and we have this light kind of casting down this way, right? So anything facing this object, right, this direction is going to be lighter than things facing downward or seemingly downward. You can make this look however you want, but what you want to do is you want to stay within 3 or 4 shades of gray. So you'll see everything is right here inside of that gray window. The same could be done with shades of blue. So, if you want that to be the brightest, and then you want this to be a mid-tone, and then your darker tone would be this one, and then your darkest tone would be this like dark blue. And you just kind of go through and that one looks like it could be that, and that could be this one. This would be the darker, and that one would be that one. You can kind of play around however you want to and generate them however you see fit, really. I mean, I'm using this as an example, so it's not the greatest, but yeah, it's an interesting, unique way to present color and sort of showcase its ability to kind of play with the eye and generate some interesting effects there. So with that being said, some real world examples of where you can see this stuff used. Google Material Design for some of the simple shapes and simple gradients and shadows and things like that. It's a great use. If you have an Android phone, it's literally in every app now for the most part. I mean, it's just growing rampantly. Flat design sort of fading away, and Material, which is essentially flat design with a little bit of shading implemented, is sort of where all that stuff's going, because flat was just a little bit boring since it had no real style to it, if you will. Signal Noise is a great artist and a great example of how to use multiple gradients and line work to sort of create a simple but complex looking object. So I definitely recommend you guys check out his work, or just search like 80s futuristic poster in Google. It'll come up. I'm not even joking. You do like 80s future poster images, and it's just going to be a bunch of like crazy, you know, just crazy Back to the Future posters, Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon. I mean, like, everything in that sort of realm. See, that's one of Signal Noise's pieces right there. So, I mean, it's all over the place. It's becoming more and more popular, so it's a cool technique to learn. I think for one of my next tutorials, I'll actually show you guys how to make some lettering using those styles. So that's going to be it, guys. I went a little bit over my limit. I'm at 25 minutes, so I'm going to try to end it here. But I also gave you guys a work area over here to the right to use, so instead of like copying everything from here, even if you wanted to, you can have this as a space to sort of reference back and forth and have your own workspace. So with that being said, guys, thank you very much for hanging out. Thank you guys so much for subscribing to the channel. I appreciate it very much. I mean, we're up to 70 now. It's huge. It's unbelievable. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial today. And don't forget to use the worker to follow along and use as a kind of a guide and a reference. With that being said, hope you guys have a great rest of the week and keep an eye out for the next tutorial next week. Later, guys. I'm out.